I remember the last flicker of light. A buzzing streetlight, then everything dissolved into absolute darkness. 5 years. 5 years I lived in a world where time didn't exist, where I had no name, no past. Only primal fear and a haunting emptiness. When consciousness returned, it hit like an electric shock, painful and overwhelming. Where was I? Who was I? The name Eleanor drifted through my mind like a faint wisp of smoke, terrifyingly fragile, yet carrying a strange weight. Like a whisper from another lifetime. Blinding headlights cut straight through the dark, ripping apart the silent blanket over the narrow alley. A jarring shriek of a truck speeding past made me jump. I stumbled, desperately trying to brace myself against the damp, cold pavement, sharp gravel digging into my palms. My body felt like wreckage. Every joint screamed in pain, as if I had been violently crushed and hastily pieced back together. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a difficult struggle, my lungs burning. The musty smell of piled garbage, the metallic tang of blood, and the suffocating terror in my chest all mixed together. I didn't know who I was or where I came from, but instinct told me to run. To flee from something hunting me, an unseen but palpable threat. My footsteps were frantic and heavy on the cracked, uneven bricks of the dark alley. The rough, vulgar shouting from behind grew closer, echoing like voices from hell. I heard a chilling metallic clang, a horrifying sound I knew. It didn't belong to normal men, but to predators. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst. My chest was burning, every breath becoming a painful battle. A dizzy spell hit, and I collapsed, my knees slamming hard onto the rough pavement, the intense pain shooting through my body, from my kneecaps up to my skull. A drop of bright red blood seeped from a cut on my forehead, trailing down my temple, hot and sticky, carrying with it a primal dread. I tried to push myself up, but my body seemed to defy my rational mind. Every muscle was locked rigid from exhaustion and panic. My vision blurred, the world spinning into a chaotic, shapeless mess, leaving only blurry streaks of light and suffocating darkness. 3 tall, bulky figures emerged from the shadows, indistinct like demonic shapes stepping out of my worst nightmare. Their chilling, derisive laughter echoed in the quiet space, sending a cold shiver down my spine. "Look at the little mouse trying to escape," one sneered, his voice hoarse, full of contempt and hostility. He stepped closer, his rough, calloused hand seizing my arm, fingers tightening like a vice, dragging me to my feet cruelly, without mercy. I struggled in vain, helplessness flooding my mind, drowning every last shred of hope. Their faces were blurry through my tears and terror, but I could feel the malice, the humiliating craving emanating from them. They were closing in. And I knew I wouldn't be able to escape. Just then, a strange, sudden sound cut through my screams. A searing whistle. Like a blade slicing through the air, sharp and deadly, carrying a destructive energy. This was followed by a heavy impact, a painful groan, the sickening sound of a body collapsing. The hand gripping my arm suddenly loosened its painful hold, and I felt a cold rush of air pass by, like a ghost passing through. When I opened my eyes, the world had shifted. 2 of the attackers were sprawled on the ground, blood pooling under the faint streetlight, their bodies motionless, like puppets with cut strings. The 3rd man was backing away, his eyes wide with terror, his teeth chattering, but before he could register his fear, a dark figure flashed past. Everything happened too fast, like a fleeting nightmare. I couldn't comprehend what was unfolding. A tall, imposing figure emerged from the dark corner, melting into the silent night of the alley. The man's back was like a solid wall, blocking out every weak light source, creating a terrifying aura. He moved lightly, gracefully, each step calculated and precise, but every stride exuded a terrifying, deadly power, a dark energy that enveloped the space. In the dim light of the broken streetlight, I could vaguely make out the hard lines of his face. A square jaw, a straight nose, and his eyes. Deep black eyes, cold as ice, completely devoid of emotion. They didn't just look, they swept over, assessed, and seemed to pierce through the deepest hidden corners of my soul. I knew this man. A jolt of intense recognition hit me, so strong it almost made me collapse again, my legs trembling, my head spinning. The name Julian escaped my lips like a sigh, choked and full of despair, a whisper only I could hear. It was Julian, my husband, but not the Julian I once knew. The man standing before me now was a completely different version. Darker, stronger, and 1,000 times more dangerous. The lines on his face had grown sharper, etched with the scars of time and relentless battles I couldn't even begin to imagine. That face now resembled a statue carved from dark marble, hard and immutable, impossible to sway. A black leather jacket hugged Julian's broad, muscular shoulders, reflecting the faint light, creating a deadly halo around his powerful physique. His every movement radiated absolute confidence, as if this world was created to serve his commands, everything under his control. I stared into Julian's eyes, searching for a familiar sparkle, a trace of the man I had once loved, the kind and warm man from long ago, but all I saw was coldness and an undeniable, absolute power. An electric current ran down my spine, not from fear of the motionless attackers, but from his very presence, an obsession-inducing presence. I felt as if I were standing before an apex predator, a beautiful and lethal monster, impossible to defeat. Eleanor. His voice rang out, deep and commanding, like a clap of thunder, causing everything around us to freeze. My name. He still remembered. But it wasn't a greeting, not a question, but an affirmation, a confirmation that he had found what belonged to him, a lost possession. I felt a strange tremor run through my body, a mix of terror and a fragile hope, a weak spark in the thick darkness. He found me. After all these years. He found me. But was he still the man I once loved, or merely a ghost of the past, blackened by secrets and power I was unaware of? Julian approached, his steps decisive, without a hint of hesitation or doubt. I couldn't move. My body was rigid, frozen by his potent presence. He leaned down, his deep black eyes looking straight into mine, as if wanting to read every thought, every fear hidden deep in my soul, reaching the most intimate corners. His hand touched my cheek. His fingers were icy cold, but carried a strange electric current that made me shiver, a feeling both alien and familiar. He gently wiped the blood from my forehead, a gesture unexpectedly tender, yet carrying absolute control. As if I were a precious, misplaced item, and now he had found me again, unable to leave me for a single second, unable to let me go once more. "You're safe," Julian said, his voice deep yet commanding, an unshakable declaration of power. His safe wasn't a casual promise, not a comfort. It was a command, a statement. It carried a heavy weight, like a block of dark marble, indicating that no one, no force in this world, could touch me now that he had claimed it. I felt overwhelmed, a sensation of both being freed from danger and simultaneously imprisoned by this very absolute protection. His eyes never left mine for a second, as if he feared that if he blinked, I would disappear again, dissolving into nothingness. And I wondered, was that a promise or an undeniable sentence? I woke up in a room that was overwhelmingly luxurious, a complete contrast to the dark alley of the night before. The ceiling soared high, the walls paneled in glossy ebony, reflecting the soft light from the brilliant crystal chandelier hanging suspended in the air. The cool satin silk sheets embraced my body, incredibly soft and smooth, like a cloud. The scent of jasmine and sandalwood permeated the air, chasing away the horrific memories of the dark lane. Where was this? And why was I here? I looked around, my eyes still dazed from shock, trying to reorient myself. The large window overlooked the entire panorama of Viridian City, the skyscrapers twinkling like stars on the ground, a beautiful yet cold picture. This was not our house. Not the house I had left 5 years ago. A gentle click of the door opening, the faint squeak of the hinge, broke the silence. Julian walked in, clad in an impeccably sharp black suit, a pristine white shirt, and a perfectly knotted black silk tie, an image of power and refinement. He no longer had the menacing, violent look of the night before, but authority and coldness still enveloped him, like an invisible aura. His sharp face still didn't betray much emotion, but his eyes. Those eyes softened slightly when he saw me, a small but notable change. A tray of food was placed on a small table beside the bed, filled with extravagant dishes: creamy French omelets, fragrant garlic butter toast, fresh, colorful fruits, and a glass of chilled orange juice. The contrast between this opulence and my previous dire situation left me feeling alienated and utterly confused. "You slept for a very long time," Julian said, his voice deep, yet carrying a certain control, an undeniable command. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't care about my feelings, but merely stated a fact. "I had someone prepare food for you. Eat." I stared at him, trying to read the emotions hidden behind those deep eyes, searching for a familiar spark. Who was he now? What happened in the 5 years I was missing? I recalled the image of Julian when we were married. An ambitious, intelligent man, always busy with legitimate business, a promising young entrepreneur. But this man, he wasn't the version of Julian I once knew. Julian, what have you become? I asked, my voice hoarse, weak, like a whisper escaping my constricted chest. I felt fear crawling up my throat, but at the same time, an intense curiosity was driving me, forcing me to seek the truth. He had changed too much. His entire aura was now dark, dangerous, like a ghost surrounding him. Julian didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his gaze still fixed on me, as if trying to pierce my soul. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning and the frantic pounding of my heart. He reached out and touched my hair, a surprisingly gentle gesture that made me shiver. I became the man I needed to be to protect what I love. "Eleanor." His answer was vague, yet carried a profound meaning, a statement about his very nature. Protection? Who? Or what? I looked at him, trying to find the answer in those dark eyes, which were as deep as an abyss. "Where were you?" Julian asked, his voice low, carrying a deep, hidden pain I had never heard before, a pain that had gnawed at him for 5 years. "Do you remember anything about what happened?" This question touched an unhealed wound within me, a painful scar. I closed my eyes, trying to rummage through the empty memories, vague images beginning to emerge like shattered mirror fragments. Fragmented memories began to surface. A dark room. Screaming. The pungent smell of chloroform. And a file. Numbers, unfamiliar faces, fleeting past like ghosts, like a terrifying dream. I don't remember everything clearly, I admitted, helplessness constricting my chest. I only remember some event, some numbers, a name. Blackwood. The moment the name escaped my lips, I saw Julian's eyes change. A cold, sharp light flashed across his deep black eyes, like a lightning bolt tearing through the dark night sky. He clenched his fist, his knuckles white, prominent veins visible. "Blackwood," he repeated, his voice low, full of danger, like a curse. "You remembered." The man stood up, walking toward the luxurious desk in the corner of the room, each step heavy with authority. He opened a slim laptop. The screen emitted a cold blue light, illuminating his rigid face. Complex numbers, graphs, and lines of code scrolled across the screen at dizzying speed, like another world I had never known. "For the past 5 years, I searched everywhere for you," he said, his voice cold, yet containing a deep obsession, a terrifying persistence. "You weren't the only victim. Hundreds of other women disappeared, sold, exploited in a massive human trafficking network, linked to money laundering and Blackwood's dark operations. You saw a part of it, didn't you? I shook my head. The memory fragments were still too vague for me to clearly piece together, to connect them. I only remember a few faces, a few places, a string of coded numbers I saw on a document. Julian turned back to look at me, his eyes sharp yet carrying a faint spark of hope, a weak light in the darkness. That's what I need. Blackwood is a massive underground conglomerate, disguised as a legitimate investment fund. They specialize in hunting people with super memories, those capable of accurately recalling precise details to serve their illegal financial transactions. You are one of them, Eleanor. Your memory is a treasure to them. And it's also the key for me to dismantle their entire empire. A shiver ran through me. Me. A treasure? A skill Julian needed? I, who was once a normal elementary school teacher, was now a crucial factor in a massive underground war, a dangerous game I was unaware of. This feeling was insane, unbelievable, yet at the same time, it gave some meaning to my painful return, a purpose to my life. I looked at Julian. The man was not just my husband, but now a new king, holding the entire underworld in his grasp, a supreme authority. He was a ruthless predator, but to me, he was a strong protector, an unyielding fortress. An internal conflict began to creep into my heart. Could I trust this man? This man who had become too alien, too dangerous, too dark? Julian noticed the doubt in my eyes. He approached, leaned down, his deep black eyes looking straight into mine, as if wanting to read my soul, to dispel all suspicion. I know you're afraid, he said, his voice deep, almost a whisper, yet carrying a frightening certainty. I know you doubt, but I spent 5 years searching for you, Eleanor. 5 years living in hell when you disappeared. I won't let anyone harm you again. Never. The protector's hand touched my hair, stroking it gently, a rare, tender gesture. The gesture was unexpected, so gentle, yet it carried a strong message of possession. I was his. I belonged to him. And he would protect me at any cost, even if it meant bloodshed, even if he had to commit the most ruthless acts. I felt an electric current run down my spine, a strange blend of fear and attraction to his primal strength, to that dark, alluring power. My chest pounded, each beat an affirmation of my inner struggle. He had changed, but a part of the old Julian was still there, hidden deep beneath the cold, ruthless exterior, like a weak light in the darkness. A strange sense of security enveloped me, but it came with a vague fear of the price I had to pay for that safety. He became a monster to save me, and now I couldn't leave him anymore, couldn't escape his arms. I looked into those eyes. They were as black as the cosmos, and I found myself sinking deep into them. And I wondered, was I falling into a dangerous trap, or a sanctuary I had been searching for 5 long years? The following days passed like a strange dream, a gilded imprisonment. I lived under Julian's absolute protection, enclosed in the luxurious apartment. He never left me alone for too long. His bodyguards, cold and silent men like shadows, were constantly stationed outside the door, guarding without fail. I began to recall clearer memory fragments, numbers, faces, specific locations, surfacing in my mind like slow-motion film. I knew this was the vital information Julian needed, the key to dismantling the Blackwood network, to freeing others. I felt useful. A part of me was reborn, but at the same time, I also felt like a precious commodity, an asset Julian had recovered, nothing more. One night, as I was struggling to organize the scattered memories in my head, a sense of unease hit me, cold as a wind cutting through my bones. The room seemed colder, even though the temperature was perfectly controlled. I got up, walked to the large window, looking down at Viridian City bathed in the nightlights, a beautiful scene that hid so much danger. A strange noise from the hallway outside startled me. Click. Click. Like metal lightly tapping against something, followed by hurried, strong, rapid footsteps. They were not the footsteps of Julian's bodyguards. They were lighter, faster, and had a different, dangerous purpose. The room door burst open abruptly, a loud sound tearing through the silence. A tall figure appeared, not Julian, but one of Blackwood's men. He was dressed in black, his face contorted with rage, and his eyes were full of malice, like two smoldering embers. He looked at me, a sinister smile spreading across his lips, revealing yellowed teeth. "Found you, little bird," he hissed, his voice hoarse, full of hatred and glee. "Our boss missed you terribly. And now, you'll return to where you belong, forever." I recoiled, my chest pounding, an ultimate fear engulfing me. I had trusted this false sense of safety too much. I was too naive. Before I could react, he lunged, like a hungry wild beast. I screamed, a cry that ripped through the quiet night of the luxurious apartment, echoing through the hallway. At the same moment, an explosive sound rang out, like a gunshot, but louder, more destructive, like thunder on a clear day. The opposite door burst open, and Julian appeared. His face was no longer cold as usual. His deep black eyes now blazed with a raw, consuming fire of fury. This was primal rage, the nature of a predator defending its territory, protecting its most prized possession. He moved like lightning, closing the distance between us in an instant. The man had managed to snatch my wrist, his fingers tightening painfully, but before he could secure his grip, Julian was there. A powerful, decisive kick to the intruder's midsection sent him flying, slamming hard against the opposite wall with a horrifying impact. The sound of bones cracking was sickening, and he slumped, groaning in pain, writhing on the floor. Without a word, without hesitation, Julian continued the assault. Every punch he threw carried destructive power, without mercy, as if he wanted to crush his enemy into pieces. I had never seen Julian this violent, never seen him expose this level of ruthlessness. He was not the man I once knew, but an avenging god, a monster unleashed from its chains. Julian's bodyguards rushed in, their guns aimed straight at the motionless intruder. But Julian didn't need their help. He had finished the job himself, brutally and efficiently. "Clean up," he ordered, his voice so cold it made me shiver. "Leave no trace, and find out who let this bastard through." The bodyguards nodded, their faces emotionless, like machines obeying orders. They were too used to such commands, to such bloody purges. Julian turned back to me. The anger still burned in his eyes, but when he saw me, it softened slightly, morphing into a deep concern, a rare flicker of humanity. He stepped closer, his hand trembling as he touched my face, checking if I was hurt, his fingers stroking gently. "Are you okay, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice deep, but still carrying an unshakable control, an affirmation of ownership. I couldn't answer. I was still trembling with fear, with the horrific violence I had just witnessed, with what Julian had done. And I also trembled because of Julian himself, because of the darkness enveloping him. "No one is allowed to touch you," Julian said, his voice low, full of possession, like a declaration of territory. "No one. You are mine. Exclusively mine. If anyone dares to think of harming you, they will pay with blood. With their lives." He squeezed my hand, his deep black eyes looking straight into mine, as if wanting to etch that statement deep into my soul, into every cell of my body. This feeling. It wasn't just protection. It was absolute, undeniable possession, an invisible but powerful chain. A potent electric current shot down my spine as he pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. My body rested against his solid, warm embrace, and I felt Julian's powerful heartbeat pounding rhythmically in his chest, like a wild symphony. His scent, gunpowder and sandalwood, enveloped me, both terrifying and strangely familiar, both fear and safety. Julian leaned down, his lips finding mine, and then he kissed me, an intense, feverish kiss, filled with desperate desire and fury, an explosion of emotion. It wasn't the gentle kiss of a lost husband, but a declaration of ownership, an affirmation that I belonged to him, whether I wanted to or not, whether I resisted or accepted. I resisted weakly for a moment, but my body seemed unable to fight the attraction to him, to that dark, alluring power. His kiss was hot, deep, and it burned away every lingering fear within me, consuming all reason. I felt disgusted with myself for being drawn to this violence, to the man who had become a monster to protect me. But at the same time, I also felt a strange safety, a release from the fear that had lasted 5 years, a terrifying peace. Julian had broken every rule to protect me, and that made me both afraid and mesmerized, both torn and utterly drawn in. He pulled his lips away, his hot breath fanning my face. "You are mine, Eleanor," he repeated, his voice hoarse, primal, like the roar of a predator. "And I will never let you leave me again." I looked into those eyes, black as the night, but I saw a faint flicker of light, a spark of pain and obsession, of a tragic past. And I wondered, was this possession love? Or a chain I could never escape? After that terrifying night, Julian became tenser than ever, like a taut wire ready to snap. He didn't leave the apartment. His meetings were moved to his private study, right next to my room, where I could hear everything. I heard his commands, the constant ringing of the phone, and sometimes the clang of cold metal objects, the sounds of an unending underworld. I knew he was hunting Blackwood, searching for the mastermind who had kidnapped me and almost harmed me again. A brutal revenge was imminent. Fear still clung to me, but it gave way to a strange anxiety. Anxiety for Julian, for the man who had changed because of me. I had seen his brutality, but I had also seen the deep, hidden pain in his eyes, an indelible sorrow. One morning, I woke up with an overwhelming sense of emptiness, an unease creeping into my soul. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for Julian to protect me forever, waiting for him to solve everything. I needed to be a part of this fight, not just a hostage or an asset, but a partner, a companion. I went to Julian's study. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a space full of gravity and power. He was sitting in front of his computer screen, his face strained, tired, etched with worry. A long scratch on his temple, perhaps from the night before, made me realize he had endured more than he showed me, more than just physical wounds. "Julian," I called out, my voice soft, almost a whisper in the large room. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, looking at me wearily. "Eleanor, what do you need?" His voice was deep, but anxiety was hidden beneath it, a vague fear for my safety. "I need to know," I said, stepping into the room, feeling the tension in the air, like an electric current. "I need to know exactly what happened. I need to remember everything. I can't just stay here and do nothing. I can't be useless." Julian looked at me for a long time, as if trying to read my heart, searching for the resolve in my eyes. Finally, he sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "You want to play this game?" he asked, his voice challenging, yet carrying a hint of admiration. "Fine. I'll show you everything." He began to tell the story. He talked about how Blackwood wasn't just a money laundering organization, but an intricate human trafficking network, specializing in vulnerable women and children, innocent souls. He spoke of his obsession, his helplessness when he couldn't save me, and his determined thirst for vengeance, a resolve that had turned him into the man he was now. "I broke every rule, Eleanor," he said, his voice low, full of gloom, a painful confession. "I became someone I never thought I'd be." "Because of you." A shiver ran through me. Julian had witnessed the helplessness of abused women, innocent children, and that became the driving force for him to become the new king, an unforgiving protector, a bearer of dark justice. My pain, and the pain of hundreds of others, created this monster. And this monster was now protecting me, protecting what he loved. The internal conflict within me intensified. Could I love a man whose hands were stained with blood, even if he did it for me, for a greater purpose? Should I despise myself for being drawn to that brutal strength? In the days that followed, Julian and I worked together, two strangers bonded by a shared goal. I tried to focus, delving deep into the forgotten memories. The pieces were gradually becoming clearer. Numbers, locations, faces began to resurface more vividly in my mind, etched into my brain. I drew complex diagrams, connecting the data points I recalled, the small details I had never paid attention to before. Julian listened attentively, his eyes sharp but carrying a ray of hope, an absolute trust in my abilities. He no longer treated me as a hostage, but as a partner, an indispensable part of his war, an ally. Then came the decisive night, the night everything would end. Julian prepared for the final assault on Blackwood's lair, an uncompromising battle. He put on his black combat gear. He looked like a ghost in the dark night, an angel of darkness. I looked at him, my chest tightening, a feeling of anxiety enveloping me. "You'll be safe here," he said, his voice deep, utterly certain, an unbreakable promise. "I will come back. To you." I took his hand, feeling the coldness of the calloused skin on his fighting hands, the scars of a life of conflict. "Be careful," I said, my voice hoarse, choked with emotion. I couldn't say the words "I love you," but my eyes said it all, a silent declaration of love. Time passed slowly, like an eternity, each second stretching endlessly. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark night, waiting, my heart pounding. Distant police sirens, ambulance sirens. All those sounds made my heart thump, each noise like a knife slicing through my mind. I had grown accustomed to this false peace, and now it was being shattered by a war that I was the center of, a war that pulled me into this dark world. I felt disgusted with myself for accepting Julian's violent protection, but at the same time, I couldn't deny that I was drawn to his primal strength, an absolute protective power. After hours of agonizing wait, the door opened. Julian walked in. He was wounded. His black shirt was covered in blood, not entirely his own, but a deep tear on his left arm was bleeding profusely, staining his sleeve red. His face was pale, but his deep black eyes were strangely blazing, like a determined victory, a declaration of the end. "It's over, Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse, utterly weary, yet carrying an inexplicable joy, an immense relief. "Blackwood has fallen." I rushed to him, embracing him, disregarding the wound or the blood, ignoring the grime of battle. I felt the warmth of his body, the life surging within him, a strangely familiar feeling. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice choked, tears rolling down my cheeks. Julian nodded, his arms tightening around me, an embrace of absolute protection. "I'm fine," he said, his lips touching my hair, a tender, loving gesture. "It's all over. You are safe now." I looked into his eyes, and I saw atonement there, a promise of a brighter future, a release from the dark past. He paid the price with blood, with himself, to protect me, to avenge what happened to me and hundreds of other women. I knew he had done cruel, horrible things, but all of it was because of me, because of an absolute love. And I wondered, was it precisely in the darkest moment, facing violence and destruction, that I found true love? A love stronger than fear, a love romanticized by violence and sacrifice? In the weeks following that fateful raid, Julian dedicated time to recovery. The wound on his arm healed, leaving a faint, shadowy scar as proof of the conflict, but the invisible scars in his soul remained, deeply entrenched. He gradually shed the cold, ruthless facade of the new king, returning to a more introspective, profound Julian, a matured version of the man I once loved. I stayed by his side, tending to him bit by bit, and together we rebuilt our lives from the ashes of the past. We moved out of the luxurious penthouse, relocating to a quieter house in the suburbs of Viridian, a place with a green garden and abundant sunlight, a true sanctuary, a place where we could forget the shadows of the past, where the scars could finally heal. Julian dedicated his time to atoning for his dark past. He used his immense power and resources to establish charitable organizations, supporting the victims of Blackwood, especially vulnerable women and children, innocent souls who had been harmed. He was no longer the ruler of the underworld, but a patron of the marginalized, a silent hero. He retained a fraction of his power, enough to ensure that terrible things like Blackwood would never happen again, that no one else would suffer, but he chose a different path, a path of atonement and hope, a path toward the light. I understood that his obsession with abused women and exploited children was the main driving force that turned him into the new king, and now, that very obsession turned him into a silent hero, one who brought justice to the weak. One warm spring afternoon, as the golden sunlight stretched across the green lawn, Julian took me to a secluded beach, a place where we had once dated when we were young, where beautiful memories were etched. The ocean waves whispered softly against the white sand, the sea breeze gently caressing my hair, carrying the salty scent of the ocean. He knelt down, a small black velvet ring box sparkling in his hand, reflecting the brilliant sunset. "Eleanor," he said, his voice deep, filled with emotion, a sincere tremor. "The last 5 years were hell. Every day without you was a torment. But now, you're back. And I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you, protecting you, loving you once again, and forever. For us to have a new beginning, a new family. Will you agree? To be my wife once more?" Julian asked, his eyes looking straight into mine, no longer cold or ruthless, but only deep sincerity and profound love, a proposal from the bottom of his heart. Tears streamed down my cheeks, tears of happiness and liberation. I nodded, speechless, my throat tight with emotion, barely making a sound. "I do," I whispered, my voice choked, almost inaudible. "I do, Julian." I agreed to this life. Our wedding was simple, intimate, attended only by our closest loved ones, those who stood by us during the hardest times. There was no longer the pretense of power, no display of the underworld, but only love and peace, the connection of two hearts. I wore a pristine white wedding dress, standing beside Julian, the man who had walked through hell to find me, the man who had changed for me. He held my hand tightly, his eyes brimming with happiness, genuine happiness. I knew our lives would never be entirely normal. There would always be scars from the past, but we learned to live with them and turn them into strength to build a better future, a future of love and forgiveness. A year later, we welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl with deep black eyes like Julian's and a radiant smile like mine. We named her Hope, symbolizing new hope, a new beginning, a bright future. When I watched Julian cradle our small daughter, gently rocking her to sleep, his eyes filled with a tenderness I had never seen before, I knew everything had truly changed. He was no longer the terrifying new king, but a loving, gentle husband and father, a steadfast pillar of the family. Julian found his atonement in my love and in protecting the innocent. He broke the rules of the underworld to save me, to bring me back, and now he broke his own rules to build a family, a peaceful life, a true home. I had once been afraid of him, afraid of his power and ruthlessness, but in the end, I realized that all of it stemmed from an immense, boundless love, a love that turned him into my ultimate protector. In our small home, filled with children's laughter and the scent of flowers, I knew we had found our eternal happiness. Julian didn't atone by abandoning his dark nature, but by redirecting it toward good, turning it into a force for protection. He became the guardian of me, of our family, and of the vulnerable. And I, Eleanor Vance, found my final sanctuary in the arms of that man, the man who was once the underworld's new king, but who is now my entire world, my love, my life. And I know, it's not a promise, but an eternal vow. Of a love that overcame all darkness to find the light, a love built on loss and pain, but also full of hope and redemption.